The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell. Chapter 6. The Lynx and the Bear Bring Home a Boy. Once, for a day and 2 nights, it stormed terribly. On the morning of the second day, the clouds and the wind and the rain were gone, and the washed sky was full of sunlight. The lynx stood in the meadow and watched the hunter and the mermaid go away from him along the path that went up into the wood. The path was strewn with leaves and broken branches. Then he went down to the beach through the meadow, moving in great bounds. At the edge of the sand, he stopped and shook from his fur, in a little shining cloud, the raindrops of the meadow grass. The beach's dark sand was all streaked and spotted with foam. He trotted along it, occasionally sniffing at the seaweed and driftwood. There were big soaked logs, even, that the storm had washed up to the edge of the grass. Farther along there was a dead seal, and the lynx went over to it and touched it with his paw. When he came to the river, there was a lifeboat stranded at its edge. Inside the boat, something was crying. The lynx went up, put his paws on the edge, and looked over. A woman was lying at the other end, half in and half out of the water that filled the bottom of the boat. She did not move, but the little boy who was huddled against her stopped crying, held out his hand to the lynx, and said hopefully, "Kitty, kitty." The lynx trotted to the boy's end of the boat. The boy reached out to him and patted him on the head, and the lynx purred. "Nice kitty, said the boy. But in a minute, the lynx drew away, his clear face clouding. Then all at once his eyes changed, and he started back up the beach. When he got to the house, he bounded in eagerly, but there was no one except the bear. The lynx went over and rubbed his head against him, but the bear didn't wake. The lynx meowed and tried to open the bear's eyes, and when that didn't work, he quite gently bit the bear on the nose. The bear's paws twitched. When the lynx hit him again, he put his paw over his head. At last, he opened his eyes and staggered to his feet. The lynx ran to the door, but when the bear just stood there, the lynx came back, rubbed his head against him, and started off eagerly. This time, the bear went too. As they trotted along the beach, the bear looked as dark and heavy and hulking as the soaked logs they went by, but his eyes shone. The lynx's trips almost always ended in something good to eat, but this one ended in a stranded boat. The lynx put his paws on the edge and looked over. The bear stood on his hind legs and looked over. The little boy was huddled against the woman, fast asleep. The lynx jumped into the boat, went up to the boy, and rubbed his face against the boy's face. In a little, the boy's eyes opened, and he reached out to the lynx. Then he saw the bear, on all fours now. He looked uneasy and said to the lynx, "Kitty?" The bear walked to the boy's end of the boat and stuck his tremendous head over the edge. The boy drew back, but the bear looked too good-natured for the boy to keep on being afraid of him. In a minute, he was petting the bear just as he had petted the lynx. The lynx jumped down and started toward the house. Neither the boy nor the bear moved, so he came back to them. The boy put his arms around the bear's neck, laughing as he felt how thick and warm his fur was. When the bear started toward the lynx, the boy lost his balance and fell out of the boat onto the sand. He wasn't hurt, but just the same, the lynx came over and rubbed his head against him. The boy gave him 2 or 3 wavering pats, reached up and hugged the bear, and then burst into tears. He sat on the sand and cried. The lynx stood looking at him uneasily, and the bear sat there in the sunshine. The boy stopped crying and hugged the bear again. Looking back over his shoulder, the lynx trotted off. The bear got up slowly, and the boy, holding to the bear's fur, took 2 or 3 uncertain steps. Then they started off. The boy looked very small and pale, and the bear dark as a mountain as they went slowly up the beach. The lynx, gray, silver, and shining, flowed back and forth ahead of them like the tide. By the time they got to the meadow, the boy was tired and lay down in the grass. The lynx ran ahead to the house, but it was empty. When he got back to the other 2, the boy was rested and went on. When they came to the house, the boy went in and looked expectantly around, but there was no one. The bear lay down by the fireplace, and the lynx rubbed against the boy and purred. But the boy was tired and hungry and fretful and didn't want to pet the lynx anymore. He tried to climb up on the bed, but only pulled the bearskin down on top of himself. At last, he went to where the bear was lying, curled up against him, and fell asleep. Before long, the bear was asleep too. The lynx couldn't stay still. He would run out the door, trot up the path into the forest, start to turn back, go a few steps further, give a little mewing whine, and then pad back to the house. When at last he heard voices in the distance, he bounded to the hunter and began to rub against his legs. As the hunter reached down and stroked his head, he purred so loudly that the mermaid said, "He's acting the way he does when he brings us something he's caught." The hunter said, "What have you got for us, boy? Got us another partridge?" The lynx ran ahead of them, ran back to them, ran ahead. When the hunter and the mermaid came to the door and looked inside, their eyes blurred with sunlight, the room looked dark and empty except for the bear asleep by the fireplace. The lynx trotted over and stood proudly at his side, so that the mermaid said in perplexity, "He acts as if he brought us the bear." The hunter walked over toward him. All at once he stopped and said unbelievingly, "Look." The mermaid came closer, nestled against the bear's dark fur. His body had hidden it from her. There was something fairer than the hunter, a little sleeping thing. "A boy," the hunter said softly. The lynx rubbed against his legs. He bent down and patted him without taking his eyes off the boy. The mermaid reached out and touched the boy's white skin. Then she said to the hunter, "He's so soft." The hunter put his arm around her, and they stood there looking at the boy. After a minute, the mermaid said, "But how could he be here?" The hunter shook his head. "I don't know," he said. I... He reached down and touched the boy the way you touch something in a dream, to make sure it is real. Suddenly his eyes widened and he said, "The storm, maybe. Maybe there are people on the beach. Maybe they're—" He went over to the door and stared down at the sea. The mermaid sat passively by the boy. But in a minute he came back and said, "There's no one there." The mermaid said, "I never knew what it was like when you lived here with your mother and father. I never had seen a little one. He's half like a little man and half, different. His arms and legs are so short and white, and his head's different. Look how soft his hair and skin are. He looks all helpless and not finished yet. He's so new." The hunter gave a queer sigh. He and the mermaid sat there looking at the boy. Somehow the hunter couldn't think of anything to say. He had a relaxed, satisfied look on his face. In a minute, he actually yawned. When the boy woke up, they gave him little pieces of the lynx's last partridge and water out of a wooden cup. He reached out to the two of them as easily as he had reached out to the lynx, saying, "Mama, Mama," to the mermaid. He laughed with pleasure when the hunter picked him up, but seemed not to know any name for him. The mermaid washed the boy and marveled at his little shirt, so thin and dirty. "It's like your mother's handkerchief," she said to the hunter. Later that day, the hunter left for the beach. Before long, he came back and got his shovel. "There's a boat washed up at the mouth of the river," he told the mermaid. "His mother's in it. She's dead." The tracks of the lynx and the bear and the boy had shown him how the boy got to the house. He smoothed the boy's hair with his big hand and left. When he came home, hours after, his face looked absent and remembering, as if he were back with his own mother and father. The lynx had stopped being proud of his find and had left for the forest. The bear lay by the fireplace and watched the mermaid playing with the boy. Occasionally his paws would twitch, but he was a big bear now. The boy sat in the middle of the floor, and the mermaid would roll the leather ball to him, and he would pick it up and try to throw it back. But when he let go of it, it spun off any which way, and the mermaid had to scramble after it, unless it had rolled to where the hunter was. The hunter was playing with them soon. Whenever the boy picked up the ball or threw away the ball, he would laugh a little high ringing laugh. A new sound in that big room, so used to the queer liquid laugh, the deep equable laugh of the mermaid and the hunter. Sunset shone through the windows, and the room darkened. The hunter made a fire in the fireplace, and the boy held out his hands and warmed them at it. "You can tell he's used to it," the mermaid said. "You can tell he's a—" She stopped and looked at the hunter and said wistfully, "Remember when I wanted to pick up the coal?" The hunter said to her, "I remember."